Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call this public caucus to order. I'd like to welcome Gordon Mann from PFM and Lauren Sokovich, and also Jonas Krass, who's a representative from the Department of Community and Economic Development, here with us this morning. PFM, as everyone knows, has been working hand and fist with us over the better part of the last year to develop a 5-year strategic financial management plan so that we could try to turn the county's finances around and avoid double-digit tax increases and some of the other pain that we had to inflict last year, unfortunately. So we're trying to turn the ship around. They've been very helpful, and we've been working with them for the last year on this plan that they're going to present today. And I'll turn it over to Gordon Mann.
Thank you, Commissioner. Nice to see everyone again. This morning, we're here to discuss the end of the beginning, the end of the first phase of the work that we've been doing here with Lackawanna County, to both recap very briefly what we talked about last year, which you folks are familiar with because you've lived through it, and to talk about what we think is the path going forward, including what we think are the crucial next steps to get Lackawanna County government back on financial stable footing. So if this were a Netflix show, this might be where you press the button to skip through the introduction, but we're going to make you listen through it anyway, just as a reminder of who we are and what we do. So Lauren and I are from a company called Public Financial Management. The name is what we do. We've been hired to work with the county under the Department of Community and Economic Development. That is a state department. What's called the Strategic Management Plan. Lots of acronyms here in this first slide. Gentleman to my right, Jonas, is the representative from the department, and so we appreciate their technical and financial support and in working with the county here. What we had started with when we talk about financial stability, you may recall it's 3 different things. The first tier is a very basic one. It's cash stability. It's, do you have enough money in your bank to pay your bills when they're due? And your bills are your payroll, your bills are your employee health insurance, their bills to vendors, their bills for debt. It's, do you have enough cash to pay those bills and to sustain operations on a day-to-day, week-to-week, and month-to-month basis? The second aspect of stability is budgetary stability. You went through a very difficult budget process last year. This is, instead of looking week-to-week, now we're looking year-to-year. Do you have enough revenues to cover your expenditures on an ongoing basis? And then the third step beyond that is what we would call structural stability, where you have to, where we're looking not just can you get through each individual year on a 12-month basis, but can you balance your recurring revenues against your recurring expenditures in a way that is sustainable? So we did not get very far into that process, nor did we really expect to. We were aware of the county's financial challenges when we initially put the plan together to work with Lackawanna. But the first finding was the cash crisis, which we talked about at length in August of last year. Just as a reminder, the general fund had about $6.1 million in its general fund bank accounts. It's about a third of a month of what you need to fund ongoing expenditures for the things that are funded out of the county's general fund. At the same time, the county carried forward about a full month's worth of expenses out of what it was 2023 into 24. It's about $18.5 million. And while some of those bills are bills that may have arrived on December 23rd, and so that just happens, that's normal course of business, some of those bills were bills that arrived much earlier than that. And the county had carried from 23 into 24 because it simply did not have the cash to pay them. So we took a number of steps. We outlined the cash flow crisis as soon as we saw it, and we're fairly confident that it was real and worth sharing with the public without alarming folks. We did that in August. I think the commissioners took about 36 hours to put a couple of implements in play, a hiring freeze, a freeze on discretionary spending. The county took a couple of other very painful steps just to get through last year. One was an unfunded debt borrowing. It's a nerdy term for the borrowing of, in some sense, of last resort. You're supposed to borrow money to fund things in the future. You're not supposed to borrow money to pay for things from the past, and that's what an unfunded debt borrowing is. But it's also a life raft that prevents you from simply running out of cash and having to turn the lights out and wait till the next round of real estate tax bill revenue comes in. It worked from the perspective that the county got through last year. Obviously, hopefully everyone received their paychecks when they were supposed to, but there's a long-term cost to that. That borrowing will be paid off over a period of 10 years. It's at a higher interest rate than it would be if you were just out in the market in general. The county, incidentally, also did a second borrowing last year. That one was more planned. That was to refinance debt and to restructure debt, created some money to do some capital projects. But a portion of that money also, as we talked about last year, went to closing the short-term gap. So that was the cash flow crisis that we had talked about last year and that the county has, was able to successfully manage through. The second part of it was I'm skipping over the budgetary process, which you folks lived through in painful detail last year, and going to the structural problem, because what we found is that the cash flow crisis was not just created overnight. Sometimes that does happen. Sometimes you have a government that loses a big legal case or has a major employer move out of town or has, and we all lived through this, COVID, something that is unforeseen. It's an individual, unique circumstance, and it impacts your cash flow in a very short period of time. While Lackawanna County certainly went through COVID, the financial problems were not created by some kind of one-time event. They were a structural imbalance that occurred over several years. Again, this is a table you're probably familiar with from the last time. Deficits that the county had run, simply a gap between revenues and expenditures for several years, had taken a number of steps to get through those years, drawing down reserves, certain types of one-time measures that you could take to kind of get through the next year. There were more of those last year with both the use of federal ARPA funding and use of a reimbursement for health insurance. But the structural deficit had been there for a while and had precipitated the problems that became very, very acute last year. The reason why that is important to know is not just that it changes the story and maybe your perception, but it also changes the solutions. If the problem was not created overnight, there's an excellent chance, and we could tell you with definitive assurance now, you cannot fix it overnight either. This is going to be a multi-year process to get the county back on its feet financially. The county got through the cash flow crisis next year. We'll talk about this as we go through, but this is going to be a tough year too. I'm not here projecting an $11 million deficit. We're not saying that that's the case. But if you just simply look at the budget margin is something like 0.0001%, right? This would be like balancing your home budget down to like $5. It's what the county has to do. The alternative is, well, let's take taxes even higher so we have a bigger margin. Nobody's in favor of that. But it means that the county really has to live within its means and manage its cash very carefully next year, because what you don't want is a repeat performance of last August's presentation 6 months from now. What you don't want is to have to go back to court again and say, I still can't make it through. Now I need another unfunded debt borrowing. What you don't want is another 33% real estate tax increase going into next year. So what happens in the next 10 months will be key from a cash perspective. That will also set you up for what happens really 5-6 months from now from the 2026 budget, and eventually to get the county to a point where it is structurally stable, where instead of being in kind of crisis avoidance mode, the county is in a stable place and can think more constructively. We're going to walk through the findings that are in our plan. Our plan breaks down into 3 sections. There's the historical section, which you've now heard multiple times. If you are a glutton for punishment or just want to look more at that, there's probably 20, 30 pages that talk about the financial situation. There is then the discussion of 3 different areas that we intentionally focused on for this plan. County government is big. We could have picked a lot of different subjects, but we intentionally picked 3. One is financial performance and financial management, the things that county can do to manage its funds, to make sure that taxpayers feel comfortable and feel confident that the county is making maximum use of their resources in an effective, efficient, transparent, responsible manner. That's number 1. Number 2 was workforce costs. Most of what county spends its government on are the folks who are in this room and throughout county government. That's not unusual. County government is a labor-intensive organization, so is local government for that matter. But if you're going to have a meaningful cost control strategy, and you're going to need one, then we're going to have to talk about employee compensation costs, and we'll do that. And then the last thing is to talk about criminal justice. Equally as important, it's the largest part of the county's budget again. That's not unusual or untoward. That's what county government is. It's primarily criminal justice and health and human services functions, things like child welfare. But if, again, we're going to have a meaningful impact on costs and we're not going to default to repeated double-digit real estate tax increases, then looking at the spending in the criminal justice realm is necessary as well. We're going to take you through the highlights of our report, which is, in true PFM fashion, pretty long. You can look at that for yourself whenever it's posted or available. But we will take you through the highlights today because we especially want to emphasize the next steps in each of those three areas. So we'll hit that maybe more times than we should just to kind of drive that point home, that this is about the next steps after the end of this phase. I'll let my colleague Lauren to talk you through the financial management section.
So as Gordon explained, there's these 3 tiers of financial stability that we're really using to evaluate where the county is today and to develop some initiatives and next steps. And the first of which he talked about was cash stability. So can you pay the bills as they come in, or do you need to hold on to things, move funds, or wait for revenue to come in before you can pay your bills? Oh, I'm sorry. And the answer when we did this analysis over the summer was no, you're not starting from a point of cash stability. This is our first priority when we're developing initiatives for financial management, because if you can't manage your cash, you can't really have any of these other levels of stability, having a balanced budget, having structural stability. So the first initiatives that we wanted to develop for developing cash stability or maintaining cash stability was really to repeat the exercises that the county did this past year through working with us to develop 2 projections. One is the cash projection, where we every month would look at the county's performance and determine how things have changed and project out the cash levels for the rest of the year. This is how we uncovered the $11 million deficit last year and determined that some additional action was needed in order to remain solvent. And the other projection is the multi-year baseline financial projection. And really that is the projection that shows over multiple years, do you have structural stability? Are you relying on one-time sources to cover recurring costs? Beyond that, we also uncovered 2 processes that are really crucial to having strong financial management and made getting a clear picture of financial management a little bit more challenging. The first is reconciling the county's records with its bank statements. So making sure that any activity that occurs in the bank statements is reflected in its financial system and vice versa. And the second process is operating transfers between different funds that the county maintains. So are those transfers happening consistently, being reflected in both places? Are they initiated by a uniform process? You can flip to the next slide. So that the second and third tiers of budgetary and structural stability, beyond moving past that point of cash crisis, we also wanted to address in this plan, the first being budgetary stability. So we identified a couple of areas in the plan that would help the county to improve its budgeting processes, specifically aligning the budgeted figures with historical results and also changing the way that it presents that information to departments to include some additional narrative context. So really working towards improving the accuracy and the veracity of the figures that are in the actual budget document. Beyond that, we also acknowledge that the county adopted a policy to increase the amount that it keeps in fund balance reserve. So it developed a target. A couple of slides back, Gordon had shown what the fund balance levels had done over the past couple of years. And through needing to draw those down, they've been depleted. So the county adopted a policy already in 2024 to keep a specified amount in fund balance. But because fund balance is not just cash in your pocket that you can use for anything, that if a bill comes in, you can use to pay for that bill, it includes things like money due to the general fund, receivables, other things that are not necessarily liquid. We also developed an initiative to establish a cash balance target. And the cash target would also help the county to avoid similar pitfalls as it did in the first half of last year, where we were having to check every single month what were the cash levels expected to do throughout the year. And then finally, in this same section about financial management, we'll acknowledge also that we're recommending a lot of additional responsibilities to the finance staff here in the county that already does a lot of the financial management tasks. So rather than just presenting all these initiatives and hoping that the existing staff can pick up all these extra responsibilities, we also recommend having a second senior position in revenue and finance so that some of these responsibilities and the management of these responsibilities can be spread more efficiently and effectively. And the county is already taking action on that initiative. So just to recap, these are the primary financial management initiatives that we recommend in the plan. There are more. We just wanted to highlight these as the top priority to address those first couple of steps of budgetary, structural, and cash stability.
Thanks, Lauren. I realize we're not starting with something that's incredibly flashy or exciting here. To some extent, what we're talking about doing is doing what has worked for the first 12 months or so, looking at your cash flow situation and managing that on a month-to-month basis, looking at the multi-year projections and using a longer-term perspective to decide what I need to do today or what I need to do this year to balance my budget so that I'm not just making decisions that will get me through today or this year, but through the future. Those things are basic steps. They're not terribly flashy, and they've worked and helped the county so far to avoid completely running out of cash last year, which was not a given when we got here. So some of this is just continuing what has been done so far. Some of this is not. I realize that interfund transfers and bank account reconciliations is the type of thing you say to put someone to sleep, but it's really, really important. In essence, what you have is you have a county government, like all county governments in Pennsylvania, that takes in money for a variety of different uses in a variety of different places. You have courts, you have liquid fuels, you have a variety of different things, and that's not unusual. If you looked at if you tried to do like a financial org chart for a county government, it would look like an octopus with arms all over the place. The problem is you have to make sure that the money moves from the right arm of the octopus to the other arm of the octopus, to draw out my tortured analogy. And you have to make sure that the bank accounts balance. This is for those who used to or still do print your bank statement out and take your checkbook and reconcile the two to each other. I don't know if anybody still does that anymore. I actually still do. But that's, in essence, basically what we're talking about here, making sure that the financial system and the accounting system data matches where the money actually is in your bank account. If I go in a spreadsheet and I say I have $100,000, that does not translate to my bank account. The bank account doesn't magically manifest $100,000. There are two different pieces to that, and making sure that those two pieces align so that you know where you are and that money gets moved to the right place. Bank account reconciliations are a very basic part of county government, and while there are some areas where we say, hey, we really do think the county needs to add more capacity here, this is one that the county should be able to, by dint of the folks who are here now, be able to do those bank account reconciliations. And a bank account reconciliation, last thing before I move off of this extremely technical point, a bank account reconciliation is only valuable if other people can see it. So a bank account reconciliation that happens on a piece of paper and then I put it in a binder and I close the door, nobody else can see that, right? So that we're talking about those types of moving from do you do it to do you do it well enough for it to be helpful to the rest of the government. Let's talk about workforce control costs, employee compensation. So three broad areas here: employee salaries, employee health insurance, and employee pensions. And the way we think about this, in not surprisingly a somewhat mathematical way, is you have two sets of variables. You have how much do I pay for each position? What's the total cost of that position, salaries, health insurance, and pension, okay? And then you have how many of those positions do I have? And so if a position costs $50,000 and I have four of them, you can do the math, it's $200,000, and that's how we think about compensation costs, because then what we look at is, okay, if my goal is to control the growth in costs or to reduce it in some areas, I have two ways I can do that. I can bring the cost per position down, which primarily will happen here through collective bargaining, because most of your employees are in a union and you can't just tell them, we're going to pay you less next year, or we're going to change your health insurance. You have to negotiate with them. So that's the cost per person. And headcount, where you do have some more control, but there are some practical limitations. You know, I was thinking about what we see at the federal level with Doge and Elon Musk, and this is not going to get political here. Whatever you think of his effort, it's very, very hard to translate that over to county government. And he's not trying to, because county government is primarily line staff. It's caseworkers. It's corrections officers. It's sheriff's deputies. Yes, there are some offices that have some back office staff that you don't see, similar to maybe the folks at USAID or whatever would be the federal equipment, but county government does not have a lot of those, and to the extent they do, they're mostly in the court system, which is driven by statutory law and by state law. So a type of, let's just go in and get rid of all the probationary employees or sell 5 buildings or cut our workforce, even if you wanted to take that approach in county government, you can't get very far very fast. There's just not those opportunities here. So in order to make a change in the expenditure structure here, you have to make it, one, through the collective bargaining process. You have to take advantage of that when that's present, and it is right now for the county's biggest union. And two, you have to bend it down over a period of time. So we have, again, lots of initiatives in the plan, which you and perhaps some of the union representatives will find interesting in terms of talking about how you go about that. We talk about cash compensation. We talk about health plan offerings. We try and quantify, or we don't try, we do quantify what would be the impact of the county taking a 1-year wage freeze, which I'm aware it did for its non-represented employees. What would that save if you put that through the government? We then provide an alternate scenario. Okay, what if you didn't do a wage freeze, but you did lower wage increases every year? What would that save? How do they compare to each other? We talk about health insurance plans. We talk about cost of plans, types of plans, employee cost sharing. There's a lot in there that you can dig into if you want, but the key chart here is really the one at the bottom. During the 2025 budget process, you really had one employee group you could impact directly and immediately, and that was the non-bargaining employees, and the county did that. It did wage freezes. Going into 26, you have 2 groups. You have, again, the non-union employees, which you can impact every year, and SEIU, which is the largest bargaining unit. And then going into 2027, you'll pick up the probation and domestic relations union. Not a large union, but a second one. And then the farther out you go, the more yellow blocks you have on that chart, meaning the more contracts there are that come open. This is how you bend the costs down over time. The second thing is position control. We did not find a lot of areas in the county government where we would say, well, they got 10 of those, and I really don't get it. They really only need 2. But what we did find is a need to improve position control, which is knowing which positions you have, whether they're funded, and how you fill them. Right? Again, not terribly exciting, but important. Our recommendation here is that the budget process that you guys go through every year, right now, if you look at a department's budget, you'll see one line for salaries and wages. And that line encompasses everybody who's in that department. But you don't know what those positions are because the budget doesn't tell you. It just has one line. What the county should move to is what other places have. Maybe, I think Scranton has had this in the past, but lots of communities do, where you open up the public defender's office budget. I'll just pick on you since you're here in the front row, and you can see the different salaries for each position. And then 1, it increases transparency. 2, you no longer have the uncertainty of, wait, is that position in the budget or out? Is it funded but not authorized? Do I have it but I don't have funding? We heard a fair amount of that confusion when we did our department interviews, and it allows you to have a conversation about, do I need the number of people that I have in that office? And I don't believe you need any cuts in the public defender's office, again, just picking on him because he was in the front row. But you can't have that conversation if what you read when you open the budget is public defender's office, $1.3 million. That doesn't tell me anything. It doesn't allow me to have any conversations. It's very hard to have any kind of accountability or talk about priorities. It's just one big number and one big list of big numbers. So position control means getting more specific so that you can have those specific conversations and make specific decisions. I use the word specific there a lot. Does it work? It absolutely does. I have done work with distressed cities, distressed counties, distressed boroughs, primarily around Pennsylvania, and it is amazing how powerful better specific data is, because it leads to specific better decisions, which leads to specific better results. Not terribly exciting, but really impactful. So those are the first 5 priorities in the compensation area. Again, some of them you have to do through collective bargaining. And again, the plan gets more into what kind of wage increase makes sense. We talk a lot about what types of changes should be made to the health insurance plans. We hit that point pretty hard the last time we were here. And that's all in the plan if you want to get into that. There is one area, though, where the county is going to have to actually spend more money. And I realize that this is counterproductive to the goal of near-term stability, but not to long-term stability. And that's the employees' pension contributions. So the way this works in Pennsylvania is an actuary looks at a series of assumptions and says, I'm going to assume this is how long people live. I'm going to assume this is when they retire. I'm going to assume this is how many are married. And under all of those assumptions, that means you need a big giant number in your pension plan. But you don't need to put it in tomorrow. You could put it in over a period of time, usually 20 to 30 years, and it will gain interest earnings over time, right? And they give you that number and they say, with the liabilities you have and the workforce you have, you ought to put in, you could pick a number off the chart here, off the brown line, $4 million a year, or now it's much closer to $14 million a year. That's the actuarial contribution that you have to make. Here's where counties and cities in Pennsylvania are different. If you're the city of Scranton and you don't make that contribution, you end up in Act 47, sometimes for a long, long time, because it's a state law and the state says you have now violated state law by not making the contribution. You owe us penalties and interest, and oh, by the way, you triggered one of the criteria for Act 47. If you are a county, that doesn't happen. You are not legally required to make that contribution every year. The state doesn't give you state aid, so they can't withhold it from you. They don't have that stick. And it does not trigger Act 47. No county government has been in Act 47, and maybe this is one of the reasons. But what it does cause to happen is if I assume that I need $100 million in my pension plan and I have to put in 5 today, but instead I do 2 or 1, or in some years early on, you can see in the time I don't put in anything at all, it doesn't make the $5 million liability go away. It just grows because the amount of money that I was supposed to put into it that was supposed to be earning interest, now it's not there. And so the target that I have just got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And the only way to stop that is to eventually get to the point where you put in what you're supposed to. And that gives you a chance for your pension liabilities to eventually come down. They don't come back down to zero. That will never be the case. But they don't continue to grow infinitely. There will be years when the stock market does very good. There will be years when people, this is sad, but it's practically true, don't live as long as you expected them to. There will be years where people retire later than you thought they would. And that creates what's called experience gains, where basically the actuary says, hey, you're doing better than I thought you would. You don't have to put as much money in this year. And what you see is you see the contributions crest and then start to gradually come down to a more manageable level. But in order for that to happen, in order for you to slow the train down, you got to catch it first. That's not going to happen right away. The county added, and this is a big, costly step, so I don't want to understate this or make it seem like this was not a big deal, but the county put in a significantly larger amount of money for 2025 than for 2024, and it had to. But mathematically, if you look at that chart, if you find the 2025 column, the two lines aren't matched. The county's still not putting in the maximum amount, or I'm sorry, the county's still not putting in the recommended amount that the actuary says it should. Because again, it's that same balancing reason. I guess you could have done a 45% real estate tax increase, but obviously no one wants to do that, right? So you have to attack this problem over time. You do have to, through a multi-year perspective, you eventually have to get to a point that when the actuary says put X in, you put the full X in, because that's the only way we stop X from growing and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But we recognize that you don't do that right away, because if you were just a pension plan, the only thing you would be concerned about would be your pension liabilities. But you're not. You're a service provider. You're an organization that draws from the incomes of your families and your businesses, so you're a taxing body, and you have to be able to balance that over time. But this is an area where the county is, over time, going to have to put more money into the pensions in order to stabilize that. Let's talk a little bit about criminal justice and come at this for a little bit of humility and honesty first, which is our company is called Public Financial Management because that's what we do, but financial management is not the primary lens for your criminal justice system, right? There are a lot of different reasons. You have a prison and a public defender's office and a district attorney, and none of them are purely financial. It's about public safety. It's about quality of life. It's about a lot of different things. So we want to acknowledge that. And when you look at the criminal justice chapter, the first 10 pages will talk about crime trends and about what that means for operations. It won't talk about dollars. I don't think almost at all. And it looks kind of weird because in a plan that is a financial management plan, it almost seems to go off on this 10-page detour about crime rates. And that's because we believe, even though we are public financial management, that the changes you want to make there should align with your public safety goals. So we start with that. And again, actually, well, I won't hit this one overly long here. This is another area where we believe the county needs to spend more, not less. The district attorney, who I think has changed over, if I saw the billboard right when I drove into town, the district attorney that we spoke with last year was very clear about the low salary levels. We're always a little trust but verify when we hear that, and we went and we looked and we verified. Your ADAs and your deputy DAs are paid lower than they are in the region. There are ADAs who make less than the clerical staff in their own office. You need to spend more there. What the principle we were looking for, now I will call you out more specifically, is to try and get to parity with the public defender's office. And it's two things. One is bringing the salaries up. But there's a second side of this that the public defender office has done well, which is saying, hey, we're going to allow some people here to work other jobs, to have employment outside of the office, which the district attorney's office has generally not allowed. They have generally said, if you work for the district attorney, we want you to work for the district attorney. So there were fewer part-time and those types of arrangements if you're in a private practice. And we've encouraged the district attorney to, one, yet you need to hire salaries. That's primarily on the gentleman behind me. But two, you also need to revisit that. If what we're looking for here is parity, if we want your ADAs and your deputy public offenders to be making the same thing, because we want to make sure those scales of justice are balanced in a financial sense, then we need to make sure that they're balanced in the sense of where people can work to. You're not in a position where you could just add salaries and just hope that works too. You have to find multiple ways to try and to fix the same problem. The sheriff's office, we talked about this a little bit last time. We were encouraged to look at overtime because that's a significant part of the sheriff's office budget, and we did. And whenever you look at overtime, you run into a couple of practical realities. One is most public safety offices like this are 24/7 operations, whether it's a fire department or a police department or a prison, which we'll talk about in a second, or a sheriff's office. You can't just shut them down. You can't not have people there. You have to have those posts filled. So you have the practical reality of needing to fill them. You also often have collective bargaining agreements, which will tell you who you can hire, who you can lay off, when you can assign them. There's all kinds of different work roles, we call them, that structure those requirements. But within the sheriff's office, we believe you actually have flexibility to do some things different right now, irrespective of practical requirements to staff positions, irrespective of collective bargaining agreements. They're described a little bit on this slide and more in the report. And the gist of it is right now, there are, let's say, 20, 21 posts at county office buildings that are staffed on the weekends, Saturday and Sunday. Security posts there now. Right now, those posts are scheduled on overtime. So people who are full-time deputies who work regular straight hours Monday through Friday, if they are at this building or whatever other one has security posts, they work on scheduled overtime. That's not necessary under the contract. You could change the schedule so that you have Monday through Sunday, which is what a police department, a fire department, a prison has, where you say, hey, that's a regular part of our business. Those are regular posts. We're no longer staffing those on overtime. We're staffing those on straight time. Will you have instances where you have to use overtime? Yeah. People get sick, people go on vacation, people will get hurt, whatever it is. But you don't have to default to overtime and start there. The second option is there's a distinction in the contract between what's called an additional shift, which is I have 20 shifts in a day and I decide I need a 21st, and a regular shift, which is my 20 shifts in a day that I start with. And part-time sheriffs are able to be used for the second one, or for the regular shifts, right? And so what we encourage, it's really the sheriff's office, but the county in general to do here is to have more of those regular shifts so that you can use a deputy. Because what happens is if you don't, your part-time deputies can only be used then if everybody else says no. So if every full-time deputy says, no, I don't want to work it on overtime, then I could go to the end of the list and go to the part-times and say, will you work it on a lower cost? You have flexibility to change it so that you can fill those roles faster. Again, this isn't This isn't a Doge response. This isn't, let's sell 3 buildings and get rid of the security officers, and that will save our overtime. This is a different response. This is saying, wait, we have to do these things. How can we do them more efficiently and save money? Prison, kind of a similar area of focus. Again, we looked a lot at overtime, but with a different conclusion here. If you look at that table at the bottom, we took a month's worth of data. I think that was I think this was a new data collection exercise for them, so that might have been the only data that existed at that point. And we said, okay, tell me how many posts do you need? How many corrections officers does it take to run a prison? And then let's account for the fact that people are going to go on vacation or get sick or whatever. And some of these shifts are obviously, you're not going to work somebody 24 hours. You're going to need 3 8-hour shifts to cover a full day period. So how many do you need? And what we found is the answer is more than what you're actually scheduling. So if you start and you need, just pick a column in this, we'll go to the 24-hour total. If I need 156.4, it's an average overtime, that's why you get the decimal. If that's how many corrections officers I need to run a prison for the month of August, and I only schedule 125, then I will have overtime because people do not magically clone themselves and fill in those spots. You need to account for those posts and then schedule for them, whether it's through full-time or through part-time. And we do have some initiatives in the plan that talk about trying to get more use out of the part-time. That is not easy. I don't believe that that's something where the county commissioners or the warden went, oh, gee, I never thought of that. They're well aware of it. It's difficult to get the part-timers in because they generally want to be full-time. But to the extent you can make, the more you can use part-time employees, the more helpful it is because your biggest cost here, yes, salaries are a cost and you need to put more money in pensions. Your biggest cost driver here is your health insurance. Your health insurance costs are higher. They grow faster, whether we're talking about percentage-wise or dollar-wise. So if you have part-time employees who don't carry those costs, again, this is how you get savings without laying off 25 people. The last thing, and this is where we start to get a little bit outside of our lane, but part of our role here is to push the envelope. This prison is, I think, the largest department in the general fund. Depends on how you classify courts, I guess. It accounts for, what were the numbers on that last slide? 20% of full-time employees, most of the overtime expenses, a large portion of the budget. If you are going to save money, you don't necessarily have to start there, but you better get there pretty fast. And the way you save money on the prison is people. And the way you control the number of people are these 4 bullet points here. How many do I need to run it? The number of posts. How many do I actually have and what type? Mix of full-time and part-time. How often are people out? How often do I have to backfill because I had somebody who's scheduled to work that spot and for whatever reason they're not? And then how often do things happen that aren't in those posts? And that's a big one here in the county. Often when you have an inmate who needs to get medical care, the first place you would provide it is the prison. That's why prisons are so expensive, is it's not just a place you lock people up and throw away the key. You're a medical service provider and you're a food provider. Unlike, say, house arrest, where you have a bracelet on your ankle, where you're not providing that person's food and housing expenses, right? That's why prisons are way more expensive than the other forms of criminal justice here. If you look at the Lackawanna County Prison, you can see the department costs. All of these numbers are 2023 because we did this analysis through the middle of last year. The prison costs $32.5 million. It does bring in some revenue. That's primarily from the federal government paying the county or some amount of fees that are charged to the inmates there. But the net cost is $25 million. It doesn't recover its costs. You're not expecting it to. The right number for that percent cost recovery is not 100. You're not trying to get 100% cost recovery on any of these things. But if you look at the average net cost per person, to have somebody in the prison, it costs $34,000 a year. To have someone on adult probation, it costs $1,300. And to have someone in kind of that one of those intermediate steps in between house arrest or community corrections, it's about $2,500. Now, this does not mean, obviously, that you get rid of the prison or that there's no need to have people in prisons. And this is where financial reality starts to rub up against other things. It becomes a sensitive and a difficult question to say how often and how long and which people do we put in prison. But from a financial perspective, it's an absolutely crucial set of questions to answer, because your biggest savings opportunity here is costs at the prison. And I don't mean 1 or 2 or 3. I mean enough of a reduction in the prison population that you're actually able to close one of the wings of the prison. Is that really possible here? I don't know, but what I do know is you have the second highest incarceration rate of your peer counties in the Commonwealth. So there is something that Lackawanna County is doing different, maybe for good reason, maybe entirely intentionally, than its peers. But as a result, it has more, and I'm talking about quote-unquote in-house inmates. I'm not talking about somebody who comes and the U.S. Marshal sends them to you and they send them with a check. That part of the population is taken out of the equation. These are people here that are incarcerated by the county, the county's authority, and on the county's dime, so to think about it. So if we really want to think about controlling costs, if we really do not want to be in a situation where you default to double-digit real estate tax increases, if we want to be in a situation where the cash flow is stable, if we want to be in a situation where the county is able to even do some proactive things, which we haven't even scratched the surface of. What does that mean? Well, it could be taking care of your bridges, it could be taking care of your buildings, it could be those types of capital needs. If we want to do that, we have to look at these hard questions. We have to look at what the cost of health insurance is for employees. We have to look at the number of employees in positions, even though that can be difficult. And we have to look at this one in particular in terms of the costs of the prison. And in terms of, it's not a case here in Lackawanna County where you don't have alternatives. It's not like your courts have never thought about, they're not looking at this list going, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. Your judges here are smart and proactive, and they have a lot of these programs. It's not a lack of programs. We believe it's a need to, frankly, coordinate and get more value out of them. Let me hit that one in the context of this one. So these were the 15 that we came up for, 5 in each area. These are the priorities for the first half of this year. Some of these obviously run longer. If we're talking about negotiating health insurance, you're not going to do that in 6 months with every employee union. Some of them you can't even talk to about it until next year or the year after that. But if we're saying, okay, PFM, you gave me a really long plan, tell me what I'm supposed to do next. This is it. This is what we believe the list is. We start from the financial management perspective, and we focus on cash stability, because you don't want to be in the same situation this year that you were last year. Because without cash stability, budget stability, and structural stability doesn't mean very much. And because there are steps you can take now to get towards that process where you're not going to pass another budget for another, whatever it is, 8 months. It's in the workforce cost controlling area in terms of taking advantage of the opportunities, making sure you get quantified savings through the collective bargaining, and making sure you're managing the number of positions you have. And from the criminal justice, it's a little more fragmented, because you have lots of different offices doing lots of different things. But you can see what the priorities are again. And again, the big one here is, what can we do to responsibly, and in recognition of the other reasons that the criminal justice system exists, what can you do to bring the incarcerated population down so that those costs at the prison are lower? Because the prison is as crucial as it is one section within the criminal justice system. And the criminal justice system, as crucial as it is one section within county government. And as you're all aware, as crucial as county government is for the average taxpayer, it's just one of the things that are drawing on their tax bill, along with the school district, along with their local municipality, not a tax, but along with their electric bill and their heat bill and all of those other things that that your residents and, where relevant, your businesses have to pay for. There is a need to take urgent action, because this is where I have the number here. The budget that was adopted, it's balanced basically to zero. I guess we found $1,000 in a contingency, which is 0.001% of a $165 million budget. The county did not finish last year flush with cash. That was never the goal. It carried a small amount of cash into this year, and it had some bills that come in under the normal course of operations. So the cash stability is important. The budget stability, or the budgetary structure, is important so that you do not end up in a situation where you get to October and all of your choices are bad ones because you're in that situation. The county commissioners largely had that situation last year. There were a lot of painful, difficult, bad, or hard, however you want to describe them, maybe both, decisions that county government had to make to get to the right, to make sure that it didn't run out of cash, which again, was not a given when we got here. To get to a point where at least while the budget has much higher tax rates in it than I'm sure anybody in this room would like, you are at least not ignoring the problem of the past and hoping it magically resolves itself in the future. Because that would have just made things worse. If you carried bills from 2024 into 25 and you didn't try to pay them all off, or if you carried a structural deficit and you said, well, I hope it gets better the next time around, county government in Pennsylvania isn't set up to have those types of it gets better over time because it's relying on one flat resource, the real estate tax. Hoping that the earned income taxes or sales tax revenues come in higher, they may, but not here they won't, because county government doesn't have those tax resources. So you have to be able to identify these opportunities and these problems and attack them quickly and over time, which I realize sounds like a contradiction, but quickly in that you need to take steps now to make sure they have the benefit over time, because that's when you're going to need it. Last thing, next steps, as I've said at the beginning, this is the end of the beginning. This is the end of our first phase of work. County applied for what's called Stamp Phase 1. This is, you can read the full report for yourself. This is the report on that report, and I'm sure that people will have questions or comments or responses to what's in there. The next phase is to take the elements that are in here, we would say starting with that list, and to start doing them, and some of them already are in progress. We did share these things with the commissioners or as we went along, as we approached the end of drafts. This is not, Family Feud where we press the button and you see the answer for the first time. And we are committed to being as helpful as we can be. I think it's extraordinarily cheesy for a consultant to come here and tell you that the first thing you need to do is hire that consultant to do more work. That's the favorite move of every academic person. The first thing they'll tell you in their findings is you need to do more studies. It's not what this is. But the county has gone, I'm pointing at Jonas here because he's the representative from the department, has sought more grant funding for help to do some of these things, and the county has started to do them on their own. Because again, this is going to take time, and it's going to take effort now. And again, I realize those two things sound different. But urgent, focused action over time will result in better decisions than delayed urgent action when the crisis lands in your lap. That is the end of our very long and, as seems to be our wont, somewhat somber presentation. I will stop turning my back to the commissioners and go from there.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Commissioner Chermak, any questions for PFM or comments?
Well, I have a lot to digest right now. A lot of these things we've already talked about, and even I know I have my own finance group that we meet weekly, and some of these suggestions that we've already discussed. So I'm going to meet with them again, and I know we talked to you quite a bit, but I think this is a very good start, and we have a lot of work to do, but I appreciate what you've done, and look forward to try to get this under control.
Yeah, I think the group that you meet with will find some points of similarity here in terms of the things that we've looked at. And again, it's not revolutionary for someone to come here and say, oh, you need to look at your health insurance costs. But hopefully they'll be helpful in advancing those conversations.
Thank you. Just a few comments. I want to thank you both for working with us, and of course Jonas Crass from DCD as well. So today, after a year of hard work alongside the financial experts at PFM, I am very proud of the plan that has been put together. This plan is a crucial step towards securing a stable and sustainable future for our county, one that ensures that we never again find ourselves in a position where drastic double-digit tax increases are necessary to correct years of fiscal mismanagement. What I've said from the beginning in trying to describe this process is that it's almost like opening the hood of your car to check how the engine is running. And the analysis that we heard today and that has occurred over the last few months has uncovered several weaknesses that must be addressed and will be addressed. The 33% tax increase in this year's budget was a difficult but necessary decision, as you heard from Gordon Mann today. It was the result of past administrations neglecting long-term financial planning and making short-term choices that ultimately, in the long run, harm taxpayers. We cannot afford to repeat those mistakes. As the old adage goes, when you're in a hole, stop digging. This plan provides a responsible and strategic roadmap for the county's finances, ensuring that we operate efficiently, control costs, and make informed financial decisions that protect our residents. As Gordon said, the plan includes 4 key components. The first one, as you'll see in the full report, is a financial condition assessment, which gives us a clear picture of the county's fiscal health and the challenges that we must overcome. The second is the financial management recommendations, and that's to improve budgeting, forecasting, financial oversight, and ensure that taxpayer dollars are spent wisely. Next is workforce recommendations to address staffing needs and long-term labor costs while maintaining the quality services that our residents in Lackawanna County depend on. And finally, the criminal justice recommendations, which are aimed at improving efficiencies within our courts, our prison, our sheriff's office, and corrections to enhance public safety while managing costs. And I'm happy to say that out of, in the full report, there are 47 recommendations. I went through this last night, and we have either completed or are in process with 20 of them. So it's not like we're just getting this report today and we're starting from scratch. We have been communicating with PFM from the beginning, and we've been working on these since last year. Accomplishing the goals set forth in this plan will require discipline, collaboration, and accountability. I'm committed to implementing these recommendations, and we will provide periodic updates to the public about the progress that we are making on all of these recommendations. It will take tough but necessary decisions, strategic investments, and a commitment to fiscal responsibility to ensure that Lackawanna County moves forward on solid financial footing. I want to thank PFM for their expertise. I want to thank all of our directors, our row officers, and the courts, all of our staff here in the county, many of which are here today, for all of their work over the past year, their partnership, and most importantly, I want to thank the residents of Lackawanna County for their patience and their trust as we work to build a stronger, more financially stable future. This plan that was presented today is our commitment to them, a promise that we will not allow the mistakes of the past to define our future. And I thank everyone for coming out, and with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.